Welcome back. So today we're going to take a look at the CVJ CSA. For those of you who don't know, CVJ is a new company, somehow related to TRN, but essentially they are brand new, and the CSA is the bottom of their product line. It started out with the CSN, and then there's the middle, which is the CS8 maybe, something 8, and then there's a CSA, which is their 1BA, 1DD. This one came by way of the IZ Pop Store on Amazon. I want to thank them for sending this out to me. It took a while to get engaged with them and actually get this sent out. So again, thank you to those guys for shipping this to me. You can see on Amazon today it's $26.99. There's a $3 coupon, so it's about $23.99. That's about $4-ish, I think, difference with AliExpress. So not a whole lot of difference there if you want to get this one quicker and in your hands. So it does come with this the same kind of attractive wooden box that you've probably noticed in other reviews. It's super nice, bunch of tips, cable, comes in this nice brown bag, which happens to match my copper cable really well, so I was happy that all worked out. I didn't realize that they were the same shade, but great. So let's talk about a little bit of the confusion first. So when I got the CSA, and then I noticed that people were talking about batches. So I tried to figure out which batch I had, and I didn't really find a whole lot of information. So I sent an email to the IZ Pop Store, and I said, which batch is this? Which one are you selling? Do you know anything about the batches? And they basically said there's not 3 batches, there are 3 versions. There was a version for Korea, a version for Indonesia, and a version for the rest of the world. And this is the rest of the world version. I'm not sure I fully understand that. I mean, judging by the tuning, but that's what I was told, so we'll go with that. So the first thing, if you read any of the reviews on the CSA, neutral, bright, those are the 2 words that come up right up front. And I think that's pretty generous considering how little bass there is out of the box. And I tried the tips, I tried the cable. You really gotta eke out as much bass as possible because it is really bright. And you plug this in for the first time, and I think I was actually listening to Katy Perry's Daisies, and I had the volume up a little bit too high, and it is crazy bright. And so I think to get kind of any bass out of it, you really have to tweak the volume quite low. And then you're kind of in the range of there's some bass there, but I'm not really sure. But what I really noticed was it was really bright, but not quite as shouty as, say, the ZSTX or the ZSN Pro X. It's definitely bright. It's definitely in the same league, but not as shiny. I mean. So I would call that treble potential, and we'll kind of get to why I said that in a minute. So trying to get through the first song, Daisies, couldn't really do it. So kind of stumble out of my room, grab my micropore tape, cut 2 squares, and end up essentially covering the whole nozzle again. So you can kind of see the whole nozzle is actually covered on this guy. So if you go back to Audioreviews Modding guide, there's a little note that says partially covering the nozzle will not result in usually doesn't affect the bass. So in this case, and what I did on the ZSN Pro X as well, is I covered the whole nozzle because it actually emphasizes the bass quite a bit. And these guys kind of needed that in spades. It just wasn't, if you're really looking for, if you listen to music that has no bass, it's probably in the right ballpark for you. People talk about clarity and, you know, that airiness with the CVJs and the CSA in particular. Yeah, all that, but there's not much happening down below all that. So I went into Tape Mod, covered the whole nozzle, and you basically get back all the bass and kind of most of what that treble potential I heard before, because it's actually kind of nice. It feels kind of almost as high as the ZSTX, not as shouty, rolls off quicker, but at the same time, it's still, you know, a budget $20 IEM, so you can't expect, you know, perfect miracles. The cymbal police will still come by and write a ticket because those aren't all that great, but I think it's kind of a happy medium between being overly shouty, you know, giving you enough treble but not going over the top, and breaking down to something that's shouty. So not too bad on that part. So with the tape mod, you essentially end up, instead of going neutral bright, it almost sounds very V-shaped, because this dynamic driver has a really strong mid-bass punch. And if you listen to it in its neutral bright, that's kind of the part of the bass that you can actually hear. There's a little punch to it. Put the tape mod onto it, and it basically becomes a slightly toned down version of the ZSTX, which had a crazy strong slamming mid-bass. This is toned down a bit. It doesn't quite hit as hard as the ZSTX. It's sort of in between the ZSTX and the ZSN Pro X, where the ZSTX had not enough sub bass, but it had a crazy strong sub or mid bass. This is kind of a toned down mid bass, but still hits very hard, a little more sub bass. So it's sort of in between where the ZSN Pro X is kind of over here with kind of that little even less mid bass but more sub bass. So it's this happy medium for me between the two. So not too bad. So like I said, so bass wise, it's quite powerful, more powerful than you ever imagine if you haven't put a piece of tape on this thing, because you go from essentially no bass to a real slamming, thumping mid bass. Definitely a big bump over the mid bass, not as much over the sub bass, but go with the mid bass punch. It's really good. So as I said, it's kind of between those two, and not quite as fast as the Pro X or the ZSTX. It's just a bit slower. So the mids is sort of where the tape mod and the non-tape mod sort of collide. So you still have this bassy, you know, bump over here, but it's not really bleeding into the mids as much as you would think it would. So you still end up in the mids with some clarity, some airiness, more than you think you're going to end up with. And I think it's just kind of where you started out, this neutral bright. On the ZSN Pro X, you ended up with something that would have kind of a heavy bleed to it. It was like a really full, thick midsection. This sounds kind of more like the neutral bright version, where the mids, they lean, definitely lean. You'll get a full sound, but it's not weighty at all. It's kind of how people described it, that there's a clarity to it, there's an airiness to it. Really nice. I wouldn't call it, you know, thick by any means, but quite nice. And for me, that was like the real difference between the two, is that these have kind of a thick, weighty, bassy midsection. This is definitely this leaner version. Airiness, clarity, definitely shines through on here. So pretty nice. Treble, as I said, not KZ shouty. It has some extension. It rolls off a little quicker, but it doesn't go shouty, which is kind of a bonus. But it has like a real shine to it. And when I said this treble potential, it's kind of shown through more than I expected to with the tape on it. So you end up with this kind of heavy V shape, and the attack and decay ends up being really nice, much better than what you hear with the neutral bright version. So things ended up almost a more natural sound, and like I kind of called out Nirvana Smell Like Teen Spirit, the opening drums. When you hear those drums, it's quite realistic. I mean, it's really realistic for $20. It kind of blew me away. I kind of had to take a double take of how good it sounded. And, you know, everything doesn't sound that good, but, you know, bits and pieces, you put the tape mod on, it kind of affects things. So you kind of affect, some things are going to be a little better, some are going to be a little worse. But I think as far as this balance between the bass and this kind of bright treble, it does some really nice things on instruments, on acoustic guitars, the snare drums, the drums, piano, all those things that have, you know, both sides of high frequency and low frequency, that attack and decay of the notes, really nice on this guy. So details, I would call it detailed, and what I noticed much more than anything else were some of the audio cues around voices. You get a real sense of, sort of that airiness, sort of the acoustics of the room, the little reverberations that you hear. It sounds really natural. So I don't notice, as much within the notes, within voices, super detailed, but a lot of these small things, around the midsection were quite nice. So London Grammar's Hey Now, her voice right in the beginning, her first couple lines, when you listen to what's happening and the acoustics around her voice, lots of cues there that don't necessarily always come through on a $20 pair, so pretty cool. Soundstage, it's almost blonde-like in this configuration. So the voice is offset a little bit just in front of you, and it's wide, so it's very much like that blonde front row version of a soundstage. So you kind of have your head, and then the voices are just in front of you, and the instruments kind of go wide, and the whole thing is seamless. I call it blonde-like, but it's just generally a nice wide space. The vocals, not too close, not too far. They kind of got that nailed pretty well. For separation, not quite as good as the ZSTX. I think the ZSTX kind of nailed that for $15. Those locations are kind of hardcore, identifiable. This is kind of closer to the ZSM Pro X. Good, not super great, nothing spectacular, but definitely identifiable and quite nice. So I think that's kind of my general pitch on what I did with the CSA. You can certainly read other reviews, and they did kind of a full write-up on the neutral bright version. Just didn't really work for me, so I went the tape mod route, and it becomes this addictive V-shape playlist killer. I mean, you can essentially go through, if you're into pop music, EDM, even some rap, it goes pretty hardcore into the bass genre, so I would put it up there as a playlist killer. It's kind of in that TRN ST1 league of pretty much anything will sound reasonable on it, so quite happy with it at that point. Not as happy with the neutral bright version, much happier tape mod. And again, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.